Well, here we are in 2023, and I'm continuing to get asked whether or not it's worth it to repaste a graphics card. So today we're gonna kind of take a mid-range, upper mid-range, older card, and we're gonna see whether or not we gained anything from repasting it. We'll also talk about when to repaste, what kind of paste to use, what kind of paste to avoid, and then just kind of take you through the process of getting it cleaned up and new paste applied. The new MD7 full tower PC case from Fantex creates the perfect picture frame to show off your system. Insane airflow and direct GPU cooling creates the best possible environment for modern high-power GPUs, while the internal and external cable management systems make building and maintaining your system extremely user-friendly. The integrated DRGB lighting is controlled by an included dual-channel DRGB controller with all new effects, allowing you to make your system uniquely yours. To see the full spec list and options, follow the link in the description below. So what this is right here is my EVGA RTX 3070 XC3. EVGA. In the arms of the angels, something, something, sad lyrics. This card though, honestly, so I was conflicted on how to do this video if I wanted to be repasting an older card, because we know thermal paste does degrade as time goes on. So an older card could definitely benefit from repasting, but the questions I'm getting lately actually are whether or not it's worth repasting a new card. So this kind of hits both of those questions because it's 3 years old. The RTX 30 series launched in September of 2020. Seems like an eternity ago. So this is a minimum, well, it's a maximum about 3 years old at this point. Now, there's different types of thermal paste, different types of thermal compound. They're not all created equal. So like this is Arctic Silver. This was very, very popular back in the day because it actually had silver particles in it, which were designed to add more kind of like a metallic surface area to it to carry heat. The problem is it was also conductive. So getting this on components that carry electricity that are not conformal coated or have a clear coating on there to protect it from contact, this could kill your stuff. So that's why Arctic Silver sort of kind of went the way of the going away. Then you have stuff like MX4 from Arctic, which became very popular because it was inexpensive, it was cost effective. But the thing is, like, thermal paste is actually improved even beyond this particular type of formula. KP Extreme or Kingpin Extreme is what I tend to use the most of because I get the best results out of it. It stays liquid for longer. The problem with thermal paste is because it's actually a liquid-based product, like any other liquid, it can evaporate over time or lose some of its active materials in there that are liquid and then start to have less transmissive properties to it. So it'll get harder, it'll become more like clay rather than being a liquid, which will obviously hurt your thermal transfer. Kingpin Extreme, the KPX, the blue stuff here, pretty much never turns into that hard state. It's kind of amazing. And in fact, if it does start to get warm or like cold in the tube and start to thicken up, just hitting it with a little bit of warmth, it'll start to run really nicely again. So every time you turn on your graphics card, you're basically kind of like reliquefying it if it does start to do that. And then you have like the Thermal Grizzly stuff, which is Der Bauer's brand. He's got Thermal Grizzly, he's got Conducta-Knot, Cryo-Knot, it's got all kinds of different knots, if you will, liquid metal and all that sort of stuff. This is what you'll typically find included with a lot of air coolers, water blocks, a lot of stuff just throws Thermal Grizzly in there. Because Thermal Grizzly kind of bridges the gap between something like MX4 and the more boutique higher end thermal paste like Kingpin Extreme or Conducta-Knot or Cryo-Knot. Anyway, first we have to get our baseline. Because this card has only been used for a handful of reviews and never ran on a daily basis, the thermal material in there, or the thermal paste, has not been cycled a whole bunch. Every time it gets cycled, like I said, it kind of goes from a little bit more of a solid type of state, even though it's still liquid, it's a thicker, more coagulated. And then as it gets warm and is used under temperature, it sort of thins. And over time, that pressure can start to ooze out or squeeze out of the gaps that are created. Because remember, all thermal paste is designed to do is to fill in the microscopic peaks and valleys that exist between both the cooler and the actual die itself to give you much better contact. Obviously, the thinner we can get that contact, the closer together those two metals can be, the better it will be. So that's why the thermal properties of thermal paste, they call it a thermal paste, it's really a thermal interface material, or a TIM, you hear that? It's just a material that goes in between two things that are designed to kind of bond them thermally. The thing is, they're not all created equal. So we need to know where we stand right now in terms of the out-of-the-box temperature. So because it hasn't been used a whole lot, It hasn't had a lot of those cycles on it, which means it should still be acting as if it were day one at this point, minus whatever may have potentially evaporated over the last 3 years. And as it sits in our warehouse, it can go anywhere from fairly humid to really, really dry given the area that we live in. So it's had quite a few seasons now of humid, dry, humid, dry, humid, dry, which can obviously have a huge effect on the overall performance of the thermal paste. I'm gonna be using 3D Mark Speedway. Because it's an RTX graphics card, to get full load temperatures, I've got to hit the RT cores. If I don't hit the RT cores, it draws a lot less power, it creates a lot less heat, and then we may not get a huge, we might not get an accurate result. The other thing too is like, I kind of wanted to do this with like a 3090 Ti or a 4090 just because of the massive amount of power. But realistically, I'm trying to see what the results look like in a more average use case rather than, because here's the thing, if we found, oh yeah, we dropped 3 or 4 C on a 4090 at 500 watts. A card like this, which is like 220 or some 200, really low wattage power, probably would see no difference whatsoever. So I figure we'll just kind of land in the middle here with a 3070 to see what the actual temperatures look like. So what I'm gonna do now is I've got my core voltage maxed, I've got my power limit maxed, my temp limit maxed, but no added core clock, no added memory clock, and I've locked the fan speed to 75%. If I don't lock the fan speed, we don't get an accurate A-B comparison. We're also in an HVAC controlled room. The temperature in here is going to be at a locked, steady 71 degrees Fahrenheit. That will not change. This room is the AC in this room is designed to keep it at a very constant temperature. So with that said, we're going to let this loop until the clock speed or the temperature completely stops rising, goes completely flat, and then we'll go through the repaste process and we'll compare. Okay, so we have pretty much completely maxed out our temperatures. 64 C is where we're at. It hit 65 for like a split second and then came back down to 64, and it hasn't moved. Our hotspot maxed out at 77.9. We're really sitting more like 76.1 to 76.4, depending on what part of the test it's in. So these are the temps right here that we want to at least not exceed. If we exceed that after we've repasted, then either we didn't get full coverage on the die, which is a problem, or we didn't put our cooler back together right, or we have a mount issue. There's a lot of reasons why it could go up. We should never see it go up unless we just put complete crap paste in there. So anyway, core clock, that's the other aspect of this that matters. So we started the test here at 2010, and then it pretty much immediately starts to drop with the temperature. As the temp goes up, the frequency drops a little bit. So 1980, so it was pretty solid right here. See this? Like the line has got little dips. That's every time the test restarts. But now look, now it's like it's gotten a little bit more jagged. Because what started to happen here now is we're getting the VRMs are full temperature soaked, the memory is temperature soaked, the PCB has gotten hot. So as the core is cool, that core temperature may hit 65 or 63, whatever it is right there. But then as that temperature radiates out from the core and warms up the rest of the board, then you start to get, instead of this nice flat 1980, 1980, 1980, as we get over here, you can see it starts to really fluctuate between 1980 and 1965. That's just one boost bin right there, 15 megahertz. You can see now it's up and down, up and down, up and down, because this is how long it took for the board to fully saturate. So this is why you run these tests for a while, because it's about more than just the core temp. It's everything else on the board as it gets hot. So these are the numbers that we are looking for improvement on. If we see our core clock improve, or at least stay up in the 1980 to 1995, then we might see the temperatures stay roughly the same. But if the heat is able to more efficiently escape the core and not spread out as far across the PCB, if you will, then that could lead to another boost bin or two higher, which would be a slight improvement in performance. But realistically, all we're looking for here is just longevity of our card. We're trying to keep it alive as long as possible. We're trying not to lose performance, because as thermal paste degrades and the temperature goes up, as I already showed you, the core clock will go down with it. So let's go ahead now, cool the card off. I'm gonna stop the test. I never just turn off the system with it being full hot. I always let the card run, and then what I'll do is I'll put the fans to 100% when it's not under a load. Because again, even though the core is coming down, it's at 44, 43, 42. Remember, the rest of the PCB is also heat soaked, so I want to give it time to cool down, then I'll shut it off and clean off my thermal paste. So obviously the way each graphics card comes apart is going to be a little bit different. Aftermarket cards tend to be a lot easier than NVIDIA cards, by the way. A few things you want to be mindful of. Make sure you know where all your connectors are for your fans. This is going to be a bad day if you rip a fan connector. So each one of these is for a fan. So we got black, tan, and blue. This is front, middle, rear on the fans. This one's just using standard Phillips head stuff, so we're not going to have to worry about using any sort of like pentalobe or crazy stuff like if we were taking apart an Apple product. But anyway, keep in mind too, this one doesn't appear to have any warranty void stickers, even though in the United States you can't void a warranty by putting a sticker over something. Brands are still going to try and scare you away from working on your own stuff. But we believe in right to repair around here. On the other side here too, you'll see there's another plug. That's because this also has an RGB, this EVGA area here lights up RGB. So make sure you locate all of your plugs and unplug those gently. So to unplug these, it'd be useful to have a little like plastic spudger tool or something, but I'm just gonna use a part of the Phillips head. So I'm gonna be unplugging these after I get the cooler a little bit loose. I need some slack to be able to pull the cable down. I mean, you can kind of do it with it together still, but I don't wanna damage anything. If I were to damage anything, I'd rather damage the RGB than the fan headers for obvious reasons, but I can't really get my fingers down in there. So I'll just have more room when the cable or the cooler's loose and get it apart. So I'm gonna start by taking apart the most perimeter screws. I also like to use the lid of the iFixit kit as almost like a grid so I can remember where things went. Like I said, obviously your card may be different. It depends on the brand. Every brand is a little different on how they do this. It's acting like there's a screw that I missed. Nope. So it was just the thermal pad. So you saw the way it didn't seem like it wanted to come up. That's because the thermal pads that are on the back were making pretty good adhesion. This is also adding, letting heat come from the back of the VRM to the back plate. So be mindful of that. Make sure you get all your screws off before you start just yanking it up. So set that aside. The only 4 screws left now are going to be the 4 that are around the GPU perimeter here. So these are spring-loaded screws. That's because they're designed to bottom out and then let the spring hold the tension evenly across the back of the die. So these are pretty easy when you put them back together. You just tighten them down as far as they'll go. Go snug. You don't have to go any farther than snug because literally the threads are stopping for a reason and the springs are doing the rest of the work. So right now, the cooler and the GPU PCB are pretty stuck together. And I want to also make sure that there's no screws on the front right here. Sometimes there'll be screws on this IO plate screwing directly into the PCB. This one does not have, or directly into the cooler. This one does not have that. So I like to start on the back of the card and then just sort of twist. And it's kind of scary because this one you can tell has been together for a while because this thermal paste is definitely acting like paste and not wanting to come apart. But that is, believe it or not, completely freaking normal. He's really glued together there, There we go. So you saw there was a fair amount of tension needed. This is also fairly typical. You can see the thermal pads for the RAM kind of just ripped on me right there. That's gonna probably happen. That's probably gonna be inevitable. Believe it or not, that is not a problem. As long as the thermal pads go right back in their spots, it's not gonna be an issue. So I'm gonna start by cleaning, and I'm gonna leave this residue for the thermal pad and everything on here. I'm not gonna clean that. But I'm gonna take blue shop towel. I'm gonna take my isopropyl alcohol and I'm going to spray it on the towel right now and not the card. Fold it over so that the wet part is just like under my finger. And it's actually pretty hard, by the way. This I can demonstrate this. This thermal paste, see how hard and like kind of flaky this is? It didn't really seem to affect the temperatures. I mean, 64C is kind of exactly where I would expect this card to land. But I just want to point out that it definitely is not what I would classify as liquidy anymore. Like I'm really having to scrub this off of the copper. But it's important to get a really good, clean surface. We don't want to cross-contaminate the new fluid with any of the residue from the old fluid for chemical reasons. I mean, they could be two completely different types of fluid. I've never actually tested what happens if you don't clean one. You just take the leftover remnants of one and put a different paste on it, put it together and see what happens. If you guys want me to do that video, then make sure you guys comment and like down below so I know you want me to do that. I've never done that. That might be interesting. So I'm gonna be using this spreader that comes with all the Kingpin Extreme, knowing that it's pre-spread. I don't have to rely on mounting pressure to spread it. It'll squish off the sides. It's non-conductive. This is all conformal coated. Nothing's gonna hurt it, but as long as you kind of just smash and move in one direction, you're not gonna fold air into it. It's not gonna be a problem. It will squish out if any does get in there. I've literally never had this be a problem. I've been doing this for every CPU and GPU I've been doing in the last like 5 years. So now we've got our frosted GPU die. We're gonna put our cooler back together in the exact opposite order of what you just saw. We're gonna run the test again. Corsair brings gaming to the next level with the Xeneon 45-inch flexible OLED Xeneon Flex display. With up to 240 Hz refresh rate, 0.03 millisecond gray to gray response time, motion blur canceling, anti-reflective coating, burn-in protection, and customizable bend based on user's preference, the Xeneon Flex from Corsair allows gamers to truly tailor their display to their liking. Click the link below for more details. Well, it said 66. That's hotter by 2. But I want to point something out before we look at the chart. I want you to notice the more consistency of the clock speed right now. So this particular part of the test, it tends to go up, down, up, down. That 1950 was unfortunate, but watch, 1980. So I'm noticing it stays at 1980 longer. Now, what I'm curious about is what our hotspot is. Well, our hotspot's at 80.2. 81.6. So in this particular instance, you can see we came up about 2C across the board. Now there's a couple reasons why this could be. One, it takes time for thermal paste to kind of get melded in, if you will. Usually the worst temps you'll see is right after it's applied. So right now I'm giving it this nice hot, just kind of a looping run to get it nice and hot. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop the run and I'm gonna cool it down. And after I cool it down, then we get it hot again, oftentimes you'll notice over time the temps will start to drop. So I wanted to point this out because of the fact that there's a lot of times people will repaste their stuff and they'll notice maybe an immediate increase in temps. But that's really common because the thermal paste, like I said, does actually take time to liquefy and really start to work its way into all those microscopic peaks and valleys and then create a bond there. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the test right now. And I wanna see how fast the temps come down. I mean, look at this, 52, 51, 50, 49, and we're still at 75% on the fan speed. So I'm gonna go full speed right now. I'm gonna let it sit for about 15 minutes at full speed to get it as cool as possible. And then I'm gonna go ahead and I'll run the test again. Okay, so I wanted to investigate the temps because it just didn't seem right to me. And I can tell by the mount, by looking at this, see how it's like real thin on half of the die and real thick on the other half of the die. You notice the thick part? That means it didn't compress down fully. So if it's real thin, that means we've got a nice tight bond and then the paste squished out and the only thing that was left is what was needed to fill the voids. If it's thicker and it's got that like kind of like a melted Kraft cheesy look to it, that's where there was more gap. And so that's on the side where we had the torn pads. I have a feeling that when I put the card back together, if you take a look on this pad right here, both of them, you can see that there's some raised areas because the pad's sort of torn in half. I have a feeling one of the torn pieces still on the cooler sat on top of one of these other torn pieces and not within the piece that it tore out of, which created a thicker pad because even though it compressed, it was creating more of a thicker area there that couldn't compress down all the way. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to have to try and very carefully transfer this torn pad over to where it goes. Now it won't be too bad because I'm using the same spreader to just sort of cut it or scrape it off rather than trying to peel it off. If I peel it off, it'll stretch and it'll do all kinds of things that just won't be beneficial to our end goal here. So now just mush those back down. I should have just done this the first time, but it's important that we show these kinds of things. That way you can keep this in mind with yours. See, now I've got it all kind of like one solid pad again. And you can even take this and It'd be like smoosh, 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 smoosh. So yeah, it may have only been a couple of degrees, but it was enough for me to go, you know what, I've had enough experience with this thermal paste, I've had enough experience with these GPUs to where something just wasn't right. All right, so after doing what I did to the thermal pad, check this out. The 1980 is just stuck. 64C, which is fine, we're power limited, that makes sense with LED. 1980, it's not fluctuating, and the voltage is actually staying down at the 1.037 and 1.025, even more than it was in the past. So there's a 1965 for a second there. That's way more solid than it was. Our hotspot is currently at 77.4, the max is 79.5. But it's not about what the max peak is for a moment, it's about what the sustained average is. So we're looking pretty good, not much change. We came down actually almost 2C on the average though for the hotspot. But if we take a look now at MSI Afterburner, look at the frequency now. Do you see how solid this is? Remember how the first half of the test was solid like this? And then as the board gets hot, it started getting super jagged. This shows right now we actually gained something from this. Now, are you gonna notice this in your games? No, you're not. Are you gonna notice if your thermal paste starts to degrade and starts to get really bad, where your temperatures are getting high and then your fluctuation and boost bins are dropping consistently as you game? Yes, that you'll notice. So pasting a brand new thermal graphics card really is only gonna matter if the thermal paste that they use is crap. Now, most of the stuff they use at these factories is like huge drums and barrels of this industrial grade stuff, which is, I mean, realistically here, the best thermal paste from like the most generic thermal paste usually is a couple of C, maybe 3C at the most on like CPUs and GPUs and stuff. But what you're gaining here with a quality thermal paste, if you're the kind of person that just wants to have peace of mind, is knowing that this is, depending on if you use the right kind of thermal paste, it's not gonna dry out, it's gonna carry better properties to last longer, because once you start going 5-6 years of continual use, then you'll notice the breakdowns start to happen. And if you do this right away, the breakdown won't happen nearly as quickly or even be as apparent as it's happening. The downside is pretty much every single graphics card manufacturer is going to try and void your warranty if you take the cooler apart. Again, legally they can't do that, but they're certainly going to try to deny any RMA issues or any RMAs that may pop up if that sticker is poked, and that's a whole different conversation for another day. So at the end of the day, would I recommend repasting? Probably not. Just from the fact that if we're talking about a brand new graphics card, the risk of damaging something outweighs the benefit. However, if you've bought a used graphics card or something that has been mined on and has just run weeks, days, months, years at a time, even though those are not GPU intensive type of tasks, they just being on and having current going through the die that long creates heat. Or if it's someone that's just an avid gamer and they spent 5-6 years gaming the crap out of their graphics card, you'll probably gain more from taking it apart and deep cleaning it than just the thermal paste. So there'd be other factors at play there. But there you go, there's my results. You can take that and kind of formulate an opinion on whether or not it's worth it for you. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, we'll see you in the next one.